Okay,
Yep.
we'll record now. So, welcome to Psych Talk. The show is where we break down the science and the mind of one meaningful conversation at a time. I'm your host, Dr. B, licensed clinical psychologist, wellness educator, and your guide through the world of mental health, human behavior, and everyday psychology. Whether you're a student, clinician, or just curious about what and why we do it, this podcast is your safe place to learn, reflect, and grow. Let's get into today's episode. Today, I'd like to welcome Kevlyn, who is an associate marriage and family therapist at Psych Partners, one of our many clinicians, and I'm so excited about the conversation that we're going to have today. We're going to be talking about some things that are very new in actually the media and has been ongoing, and we're going to talk about how parents can talk to their children about gender issues. And Kevlyn, I really like to get to know you a little bit and let everyone else get to know you. Give me some of your education, your background, and why are you so passionate about this topic?
Yeah. So, like Brenda mentioned, my name is Kevlyn Holmes. I use they, them pronouns. I identify as a gender queer individual. I recently graduated with my master's from Cal State Fullerton, and I also am a certified geek counselor. And I am really passionate about this topic in particular because first of all, this is my community. This is my space. I did my internship during my master's program at the LGBTQ Center of Orange County, and that really just exposed me to a wide variety of different queer issues that like everyone experiences and what they can look like through the queer lens. It's also not a secret that nowadays queer identity has kind of become a very politicized issue, which is deeply tragic because queerness doesn't have to be an issue. It's just something that people are starting to get exposed to more often, and humans can get a little uncomfortable when it comes to new things, when it comes to changes. So that's why I'm very passionate about repping the queer community.
Oh, I think that's great. And I think we need to have passionate people, especially in the field that you're in,
Yeah.
and especially in clinical counseling. You mentioned the phrase geek therapy. Can
Yeah.
you explain that a little bit? So people that maybe are unfamiliar with that would understand what that is too.
Yeah. So geek therapy is a enhancement to other therapeutic styles. It is not like its own theory. It's kind of like a tag on that you can add to cognitive behavioral, internal families, et cetera, systems. And essentially what it is it's acknowledging that people's interests are a source of strength, and these strengths and these interests can be harnessed for healing, whether it's increasing the therapeutic relationship, whether it is creating metaphor to talk about difficult things. And that is, Brenda, you could have me back for a whole other podcast episode to talk about geek therapy.
No, that sounds great. But I wanted to like let everyone know it's
Yeah,
like you said, it's a affirmative type of therapy that goes along with evidence-based practices that is
yeah,
unique to the subculture and to your culture and of the queer community. And so it's
yeah,
important to understand that and that they're based by evidence-based practices, just like we add in aging, we add reminiscence therapy or we add play therapy to children.
yeah.
It's based out of some evidence-based practices that go along with that. So thank you for explaining
Absolutely.
that. And I really want to get into some of the questions that a lot of people ask from the clinical perspective. And so let's get into it if you don't mind. So how does your child's coming from a parent's perspective tend to be based on their age of developmental stage, and what should parents keep in mind at like each phase? I hear this a lot, like, oh, this is just a developmental stage that they're going through, or this is just, this is the cool thing now. But I wanted to address that. What parents should think about when they're saying those words.
Yeah. So people become aware of their romantic, sexual, and gender orientations at different times in their lives. And no one is more or less queer or more or less valid based on the age that they learn to apply a specific label to themselves and their lived identity. Because queerness is becoming more common in media, kids are having access to the language that lets them identify possible identities at earlier and earlier ages. So basically, identity is fluid, right?
Yes.
So some younger kids may know exactly who they are from a young age, while others may try on different labels as they try and figure out what kind of fits for them. And we see this with so many other aspects of identity, be it fashion, interests, job, career. Like this goes on throughout the spectrum of one's life, and it is okay and normal, and queerness is the same. I would say, like, never assume it's just a phase and always show curiosity towards your child's exploration process in terms of what you may see, like, coming up at different ages. Some gender identity patterns occur in like young kiddos. Like, there are trans people and gender non-conforming people whose like parents talk about how when they were like 3 years old, they stopped like allowing their parents to like let them dress up in dresses. It was me. Hi. I stopped letting my mother dress me in dresses when I was like 2.5. And I have read her baby journals lamenting about that process. But I didn't like come into the language for my gender identity until I was like 25, 26. Meanwhile, preteens, that's where you're going to start noticing like sexual and romantic orientations kind of pop out. That's when people start having crushes. It's when they start noticing like who they're into. But also at this age, they're going to be more aware of what gender identities, what queer identities might mean for them societally. So they may experience a lot more shame. Whereas kiddos who like inherently know that they're gay, inherently know that they're trans, might just be like, this is the way I am. Preteens and adolescents like are where you're going to start getting that shame aspect. And then there's also sometimes an aspect of shame with adults coming out and adults discovering queer identity, because there's this expectation that like I should have known sooner, or if this is really who I am, why didn't I know sooner? And so basically as a parent, it's just about allowing your kid to explore even if they're an adult, being curious along the way, and depending on what questions we get to later, just don't call it a phase. If it's a phase, they will let you know, and they'll probably feel a little silly about it, which happens whenever identity changes. So you as a parent don't need to add to that, just supportive curiosity.
I love that you said that. I think that that's really great. And since you've asked that, I mean, I'm going to ask the question, what are some specific ways that parents can help examples, some
Mhm.
helpful tips that things can parents might be able to say to their child when they come out? What language
Yeah.
can they what language can they use? Because I know that really makes a difference.
Yeah.
Like the
So
word not using it's a phase, you know? What are some of the helpful and unhelpful examples?
yeah. I'll start with the unhelpful since that was kind of the segue. Yeet, as
Sure.
I knock my elbow all over my desk.
Yeah, no
Um,
problem.
so saying it's a phase or implying that they're too young to know themselves is an extremely invalidating thing, because odds are by the time your kid is ready to come out to you, be they a child or adult, odds are they've been grappling with this like, is it a phase? Is it real? Like, can I know this for a while? And having that fear kind of confirmed in a parent is going to give the implication that like you are not a safe space for them to be in. It kind of denies them the trust that they just gave you, and kind of puts it in their face. One reframe to have is curiosity with this. It is okay to name a confusion or a lack of understanding, especially when it is paired with a statement about wanting to learn more about what they've just said. So if your kid comes up and is like, Mom, I think I'm trans, you can like sit with it for a beat and be like, I'm maybe this isn't the first thing you say, but saying, I'm not really sure what that means. What does being trans mean to you? And this is especially important because there are micro identities and micro labels throughout the queer spectrum. And so being able to give your kid, your child, the opportunity to define their identity for themselves is a huge gift that you can give them. Another thing to kind of avoid saying is, I love you even though you're queer, trans, whatever. This statement has so much good intention because it's that you're saying I love you. And at the same time, this can sound like your child's identity is like a barrier that you have to overcome in loving them. I love you even though. That even though is like a despite your queerness, I love you. When really you want to say, I love you and your identity doesn't change this. Like, I am always going to love you.
I,
Um,
Go ahead.
fun little thing. Like some parents just know that their kids are queer, right? Like you can kind of see the signs and you're just waiting for them to tell you. If they do come out to you, hold the I knew it, hold the I figured this out because your kid is probably feeling really vulnerable. Instead, like be grateful that your child feels comfortable confiding in you. And again, asking, how can I support you in this journey is means the world to queer people.
That that sounds great. Now, you've talked about some developmental stages and also
Mhm.
about the wordings. What are some of the common emotional reaction parents might have when their child comes out? And how can they work through those feelings in a supportive way that doesn't like center around themselves? Because
Yeah.
it sounds like you're saying that a lot of times parents and unknowingly and completely innocently kind of make it about them and not about the
Mhm.
coming out process. How do we support the parents about that, and what suggestions can we have?
Yeah. So first of all, I think that any emotional response can be considered common. Obviously, the most desirable are like surprised, happy, joyful, and we're here to celebrate those and talk about the harder ones. Some of the harder ones can range from fear, grief, confusion, and anger. And when it comes to feeling these emotions, your emotions are your responsibility. And that is like really hard to sit with when these emotions of fear, grief, confusion, and anger can be extremely strong. If you need to take space from your kid and say, hey, I love you and I need time to process this a little bit so I don't, say something that I don't mean to, that is going to do less harm to your kid than letting emotions kind of come out there. I think that fear and confusion are two of the easiest ones to tackle. Confusion about identity, but also fear, because the fact is that day by day it's becoming less and less safe to be queer. And when your kid comes to you and says, hey, I hold this identity that is experiencing prejudice and persecution, you might be afraid as a parent. And depending on kind of how fear presents in you, that fear can quickly be followed by anger. So if you do notice anger, that is a moment to really take a beat, take a step back, figure out what emotion is underneath. I also really want to talk about grief because I think grief is the most complicated of these emotions because, of course, grief is like a whole cluster of emotions kind of squished
Uh-huh.
together that we call grief. Um, there are ways to say that I'm afraid for your safety or I'm confused about what this means that don't create harm for your kid. However, sometimes voicing grief that your child is like voicing grief, especially around like a trans or gender nonconforming identity, this idea that like suddenly you have to grieve your daughter or your son because they're becoming something else. The way that even if your kid logically knows what you're saying when you say, I am experiencing grief. What they are also hearing is that you are grieving the fact that your child is stepping into their authentic selves. And
Mhm.
that's a devastating to hear because stepping into an authentic self is a celebration. So, this is something that process your grief while not in the presence of your child. I think it's okay to name grief, saying, hey, I'm experiencing grief about what this identity change means. How is this helping you? How is stepping into this authenticity bringing you joy, bringing you happiness? And then reframing the grief with gratitude. Gratitude that your child felt safe telling this to you, gratitude that they are living as their authentic selves, gratitude that they felt you were safe enough to tell. And then if the grief is really, really strong, that is a time to get a therapist. That is a time to kind of get with some other parents. There are occasionally grief processing groups or like queer processing groups for parents who want to learn more. I can't promise that those resources are wherever you are, However, I think grief is one of those things that keeping it as private as possible because your kid is celebrating, not grieving.
I think that's an excellent point. And I think, again, it's not about them, it's about the child. And I understand that they're separate emotions. And you
Mhm.
actually touch on a really, really important part. And I think this is the most important part of this podcast. How can parents, two things, okay?
Mhm.
Give me some specific ways that at home and in school they can help affirm their child's identity. That's number one. But also, how can parents take responsibility about learning about queer identities without placing the blame of the education on their child? Because a lot of times, and this
Yeah,
is and including myself, um, I've learned about gender identity and gender fluidity and queer identity through my child.
yeah.
And it's not really their responsibility to teach that to me. So
Mhm.
what are some ways that parents can take that responsibility?
Yeah. So, answering the first part of the question, which is concrete steps that parents can take to affirm their child's identity in different
Yes,
situations. Um, Depending on what queer identity your child is stepping into, this is going to look very different because if your child is coming out as like gay, bisexual, lesbian, aromantic, asexual, those changes may not need to have a lot of like concrete support at home beyond kind of changing how you gender their romantic interests, changing how instead of like the opposite gender, the same gender, or doing the either or option, saying like, oh, did like a girl or boy catch your eye instead of just assuming one or the other. However, if your child is undergoing a change that involves changing name and changing pronouns, use them. Even if they say they're okay with you using their old name and their old pronouns, this is a really complicated topic for children in gender expansive identities because obviously they want to be accommodating. They usually don't want to hurt their parents. Um, and it does cause harm, even if it is small, hearing misgendering happening. And so challenge yourself to use the old pronouns. There are fun ways to kind of do this system. And if you bring these up to your kid, like they're going to probably be delighted. Um, Positively reinforce yourself. Like when you use your kid's correct name, like give yourself an M&M, give yourself a Skittle. Even more fun, like give your kid the bag of M&Ms and Skittles,
that's
and when
funny.
you get their like pronouns right, like they can reward you. Correct yourself, correct others. Correcting others is a huge sign of allyship, whether it is a loved one or your kid themselves. Like the burden of correcting people about pronouns is something that like trans people know they have to carry. And so it's really nice when that burden can be lifted. Also, like other concrete things you can do, go with them to Pride. It doesn't matter if they're an adult, it doesn't matter if they're a kid. Like, go with them to a Pride event. Different cities have big prides, small prides. Like, there are always Pride events, usually happening all year round nowadays. And then if you're not near your kid, go to Pride anyways. Like, get yourself a shirt that says like mom of a and their like like queer identity. It's a way to kind of immerse yourself in their community to figure out what's happening. And then other ways like talk about queerness in your communities, kind of embrace the fact that you have a queer child. You don't, if you're not going to Pride, you don't have to wear a shirt that says my child is queer. And also ask your kid how they want to be supported. Maybe they don't want you going with them to Pride, and you know maybe they don't want you doing what I said. And when it comes to education, I'm gonna say the broad thing, and then I'll get more specific. The internet is free, um, and it is very easy to kind of like Google kind of what does it mean to have this identity? How can I help support my queer kid? And there are tons of really good and reliable resources. I typed that question in just to kind of see what was out there to see what comes up. And if you're questioning something that you read, like text your kid and be like, "Hey, I read this thing. Does this apply to you? Does this apply to any of your friends?" Two websites that I really like for their education for allies and parents alike is P Flag, that's just the letter P and then flag, and also the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project is an amazing organization that is running their own queer mental health line with like a specification on trans individuals, but they also have a really beautiful library with like glossaries of terms, different research articles, and just a beautiful resource library.
That's wonderful. And thank you for mentioning the Trevor Project. I have another question.
Mhm.
What are some of the techniques that you would use to help parents and or children that are in transition
Some of the techniques I would use, it
as
kind
a
of
therapist?
depends it kind of depends on what the main complication is. Like, if there's a kid who's wanting to go through transition, looking at their age, looking at appropriateness for medical transition versus social transition. For teenagers, like I know there's a lot of myths that, oh, clinicians are letting teenagers get top surgery, et cetera, et cetera. When really it's more about, you know, stopping puberty hormones that are going to cause distress and dysphoria in those kids. It's more about social transitioning, changing haircut, wardrobe, pronouns. And I think when it comes to using techniques with queer kids, it's doing distress tolerance, it's doing resiliency building, it's exploring different narratives that society has told them about what is and isn't appropriate based on queerness or straightness. If it's family therapy, it's going to be a lot of listening techniques, hearing, giving the kids space to communicate, giving the parents space to communicate.
I know, I think that's great, and I wanted everyone to hear it. Cis children and trans children have the same issues. It's not that we do anything different,
Mhm,
and that we're just looking at the problem at right that moment and dealing with that.
mhm,
It's not, it's not like you said, giving top surgeries to every single child under the age of
mhm.
12. It's about understanding where they're at in their developmental process. I mean, you had some really great points and you can see that you're really passionate about this. What are some ending thoughts that you'd like to for people to understand?
I think the biggest thing I want people to understand is that queerness has been around since before humans existed. There are so many different examples of gender diversity and sexual diversity, romantic diversity in nature. And not only that, queerness is ancient. Ancient civilizations had different versions and different societal rules and norms about queerness. And it's really only within the last maybe 100 to 200 years that queerness has really been erased. So whenever people say that this is a new topic, that this is a topic that hasn't been around, that's by design. Queerness has been around. So if you haven't heard about it, it's for a reason. And it's because change and threatening social norms is complicated and people have agendas. But queer and trans people have been here for hundreds and hundreds of years without stigma. And so it's reasonable to expect that stigma to go away.
I mean, I love that your points, and I'm going to just kind of chime in a little bit of the things in the science that
Mhm,
I know about this topic, and then please add in any kind of
mhm,
information that you might. So, one, I just want to verify and let you know that there's early children know early, right? According to the
mhm,
American Academics of Pediatrics, multiple longitudinal studies, most children know their gender identity between ages 2 and 5. Actually, we now know from again research that parents are the people that put on the gender identity of their children at before birth. So typically, it's we've given them a gender as a parent, and they learn about their gender identity between the ages of 2 and 5. And this is really interesting. I think this is super important for my last question. Transgender children who are affirmed in their identity show similar mental health outcomes, can be very, very successful, as do their cisgender peers. There's no additional problems. A lot of times people will say those questions of like, but I want them to have an easier life. Well, guess what? We now know that the mental health outcomes on transgender children who are affirmed in their identities are no different than those that are their cis peers. Another thing is I wanted to talk about the some gender consistence theories. In psychology, we have multiple that we learn. There are affirmative therapies like Trayton's and Marsha's and Bim's and Sophie's gender identity theories. But one of the things that they've studied, and I want you to know this, is they found out that kids don't parrot gender roles. They develop a stable understanding of gender over time themselves. It's part of what you said, the developmental process, right? Kohlberg is one of the hugest. Erickson is another one that talks about and so does Freud actually talks about the developmental stages of a child. Well, by 6 to 7, most children understand that their gender is consistent over time and situations. And if they're going to question, that's about when they're going to start really realizing that there's maybe some differences in what they're feeling gender. So let's talk about that. So there's some research on identity development. Marcia's identity status talks about how we have some exploration versus commitment backed by decades of developmental psychology research that help actually apply to gender formation identity, which I think is really important. The Trevor Project, like you mentioned, supported this by saying that people that have parents that help affirming their gender are less likely to experience suicide or depression. So it tends to be how we are letting our kids have that exploration, that freedom, or as parents, how we're affirming that gender identity that helps them navigate through this tough process. And we're less likely to have problems with depression and suicide rates. So those are some of the things that I've gotten from what you said. I just wanted to make sure that I'm 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 hearing you right. We're trying to shift from having a lot of pathology. It's not about the parents, it's more about affirming their needs, and
Mhm.
it's about allowing them to express and explore and build an authentic gender expression. Um, is there something that maybe I might be missing?
I think you hit the nail on the head with so much of that. I think that most kids kind of do have an understanding of their gender identity by the time they're in those young stages. And it's really the social aspect, it's the parents, it's the community that tells them whether or not that is right or wrong based on the genitalia they were born with. And so that's where you kind of encounter people coming out late in life because we don't have I don't remember my life when I was like 5 years old. I have no idea what my life was like at 5, but I do know that my parents tried to socialize me as a girl, and that's because I was born in the 90s. They did not know better. This information was not widespread at the time. And now that this information can be more widespread, I'm just so grateful for the parents who are giving their kids the chance to kind of explore unimpeded and not put those roles on them because kids are going to get that from media anyways.
And
And
as a
yeah,
I just want to say be easy on yourself. Um,
yeah.
but you're going to make mistakes, but try not to make mistakes because and I fall into this too. The science is clear. Gender
Mhm.
identity is real. It's shaped by biology, development, cognition, and culture. And it's not dictated by any one factor. Support and the affirmation and the drastic improvement mental health outcomes will be there. But denying and the validity of gender identity is not only scientifically inaccurate, it's actually psychologically harmful. So those are the biggest things that I wanted to get out of this, and understand that you'll make mistakes and you'll be forgiven. But like you said, Kevlyn, and you said excellent, try again. We're not going to be 100% perfect, but they have grace just like we should have grace. So
And I also want to mention that if you are a parent listening to this and you have done, and you realize in reflection that you have done harm to your queer child, it's never too late to say sorry. It's never too late to own your actions. I know I have had so many conversations with my parents about queerness, about gender, about childhood in general, and it has really changed my relationship with them in a very positive way. So it's
that's
never too
beautiful.
late. It is never too late to make reparations if you are willing to change and do the work and show up.
I mean, that's beautiful and powerful, Kevlyn. I think that a lot of parents need to hear that. They needed to hear this. And I'm hoping that we will have some questions and when it goes live, and we're more than happy to answer those questions or give resources if we can. That's what this podcast is meant for. It's meant for educational purposes and to help. It doesn't have a political agenda. It's just showing you the science behind it
Yeah.
and coming from the real the of people that are working with this population all the time. So thank you, Kevlyn, for being on today's podcast. It's meant a lot to me. It will mean a lot to others, and we won't know the ripple effect in probably in our lifetime, but I appreciate
Yeah.
you.
Thank you, Brenda. I appreciate you giving me a space for this.
No problem. Thank you. I've learned a lot myself, and let's continue to learn. Let's make this another one, okay?
Heck yeah.
All right. You come up with the topic and we'll go for it. All right. Thank you, Kevlyn. Thank you for your patience today and all that you do every day, being the light in the world, and keep on shining.
Okay.
All right. Great job.
Thank you. Am I signing off?
Yeah, you're signing off.